How we doing today, folks? Coming at you live from a really neat ecosystem, that being the Hydromesophytic forest. This is also referred to as a wet woods or a sort of swamp system, and I'm going to give a brief note on the vegetative community that we're going to be seeing here today to kind of give a little bit of context for the plants that we'll be viewing. And that's this. Broadly speaking, the floral community in this ecosystem is composed of vegetation that's typically associated with two different ecosystems, those being a forested wetland and a rich mesic forest. So what does that mean for our purposes? Well, that means that basically we're going to be seeing both wetland and woodland vegetation in this video. And what's pretty neat about that is that they'll occasionally be occurring right next to one another, because in this ecosystem, the Hydromesophytic forest, the ecotone between the two element components, the forested wetland and the rich mesic forest, that ecotone doesn't occur all that neatly. So again, what that means is basically we might be seeing woodland species next to wetland species, which is a pretty cool phenomenon, I think. But that's all the notes I have to give on context. So with that out of the way, let's get into some plants, shall we? And we'll kick things off with this little guy. Unfortunately missed the bloom time on it. This is Micellar Penstemon, the Canada Mayflower, coming at you from the family of Carexes, growing on this nice little hummock here. And what we're going to note about this plant right away is its parallel venation. If the camera would focus, you can see those parallel veins, clearly indicating that this plant is a monocot. These guys, like their common name would indicate, they bloom in May, send up a nice little white raceme of flowers. And what's really cool about this plant, in my opinion, is that it's an example of a boreal relic species, which of course raises the question, what the hell is a boreal relic species? It sounds like you're just making stuff up. When what a boreal relic species is, it's an organism from a more northerly area which had it had a broader range in the past geologic era. So basically the way you want to think of a boreal relic is it's a relict population. It's basically a holdover or a time capsule from a past geologic era when the climate in this area was a bit more boreal and could support greater populations of this plant. So that's really interesting to see. And what's cool about it is that it's another thing that's cool about it, I'm just rattling them all off, aren't I? But what else is cool about this plant is that it's growing right up in the roots of this massive Quercus alba. Isn't that a lovely tree right there? Quercus alba, the white oak in the Phagaceae, the beech family. But what's notable about Quercus alba is it's a highly important tree for wildlife. It's utilized by everything from birds to squirrels to ants to beetles. So this is a good tree to throw in your landscaping, I would say. The good old white oak. It also gets used in whiskey barrels and stuff like that. But this is a good indicator species. This is what you would call vegetation characteristic of the mesic woodland, is your white oak. And we'll see some more species like that. And again, we got the lovely Canada Mayflower. But let's run over and see a plant that you would more commonly associate with the forested wetland complex. And that's a sedge, of course, because I'm sedge heavy. You know, I just love them. They're a really cool group of plants. They're very diverse. They can tell you a lot about the landscape, the sedges can. But this one right here that we're looking at, this is Carricks Follata, the long sedge. Now this is a state-threatened species, which means it only has 6 to 10 documented occurrences in the state. So you're probably not going to be running into this one much. But what you're going to want to note about it right away is these long lancelet perigynia. These things are probably pushing like 3/4 of an inch long. I've got a ruler on me, but I just can't be bothered to measure this right now. As you can see, it's also got a long peduncle. Look at that nice long peduncle. The peduncle, of course, is what attaches the spikelet to the fruiting stalk, the culm. But anyway, moving right along. So that's Carricks Follata. This is a highly conservative species, which means that it tolerates very little in the way of anthropogenic disturbances. And like I said before, it's a nice indicator species for the wet woods habitat. Oh yeah, so that's who we got right there, Carricks Follata. Let's see some of the other plants that we've got in this area, because there is quite a lot going down right here in this little mossy hummock. Before I move on from Carricks Follata, it's also a pretty lax sedge. It's got a very relaxed habit. It doesn't really stand up straight. It's more easygoing than that, you might say. That's how I like to think of it anyway. But moving right along to this little character right here, this little vine. This is a really cute plant. This is Micellar Penstemon, the partridge berry in the Rubiaceae, the coffee family. It's an evergreen vine, and you're going to note those opposite leaves with some nice, you can kind of see the raised veins on this plant. Isn't that a very neat little vine just going off in this moss carpet? But anyway, it flowers at the terminal axils, which are the end, where the axil of the plant is where the leaf meets the stem, terminal meaning at the end. Okay, so it flowers at the terminal axils, and it sends out a white four-petaled white four-petaled flower with a salverform corolla, which means that the petals are united into a tube shape. Okay, it's white, it's got 4 petals, and the petals are densely pubescent on this. They're very furry. It's very, very cute to see. And they're furry only on the top surface, which is known as being pubescent on the adaxial surface. Got to distinguish between adaxial and abaxial. Adaxial is the top, abaxial is the bottom. You can remember that because abaxial has a B in it. But anyway, and what we've also got right here, is, which is pretty neat in my personal opinion, is some sphagnum. Now, sphagnums are a very diverse group of mosses. I'm not even going to try to identify them because I've heard horror stories, and I've actually in the past tried to identify sphagnum. They're crazy, man. You've got branch leaves, you've got stem leaves, you got to note the habit, you got to know who they're growing around, and all these different factors will eventually help you get a proper identification on a sphagnum species. But in my personal opinion, I'd say stay the hell away from them and just respect them from afar, because it's a very species-rich group of mosses. And what's cool about it is that you typically associate sphagnum with occurring in like bog settings. However, here it is not in a bog at all. It's in the hydromesophytic forest, which is just pretty neat to see, I think. And what we're also going to do in this little area is I'm going to key out a blueberry, because there's a species of it's a low bush blueberry here, a Vaccinium of some variety. Not 100% sure what that species is, but I'm going to have to take some measurements of the leaves and determine that for us real quick. So give me a second to pause and we'll get right back into that. So I did the measurements, and these leaves the larger leaves are more than 1.5 centimeters wide, longer than 3.2 centimeters in length, which is leading me to call this Vacciniumpallidum, which is, I believe, the late low bush blueberry. As you can see, the abaxial, the lower surface of the leaf, is a little bit paler in coloration than the top side. Another notable feature about Vacciniumpallidum. Don't have too much to say about it. It's a lovely member of the Carexes, a nice low-growing shrub. Nice low-growing shrub. Probably got some mycorrhizal associations going down in the soil, because, you know, members of the Carexes, they are often engaged in symbiotic partnerships with fungus in the soil, which is a very, very neat ecological relationship, I think. And with that keyed out, I think we're going to move along and try to find some more cool stuff to point at. So yeah, let's get into it. So some other plants that we've got occurring in the same area on this little raised hummock, you know, we've got right here is Medeola virginica, the cucumber root, lovely member of the Liliaceae here. Managed to miss the bloom on that. It's growing right underneath what I believe is a Osmundastrum cinnamoseum, a cinnamon fern. Judging that based on this dense cinnamon-colored pubescence on the rachis here. And the fact that it doesn't seem to have any reproductive shoots, because the Osmundastrums, they send up separate reproductive and photosynthetic shoots. But anyway, Medeola virginica, Osmundastrum cinnamoseum, and now we're going to pivot right back into sedges. This is a really nice one. This is Carricks dabilis. I call this one the heron sedge on account of its narrow build and that elongated beak that it's got. If it would focus, you could probably see, there's the beak. So that's a beautiful sedge. This guy's coming at you from the section Hymenocalocloae, which my friend Nathaniel, he refers to it as the danglers, which is certainly a name that'll stick in your head. And some characteristics about the section Hymenocalocloae that are just nice to note. It has, of course, given the name danglers. It's got dangling inflorescences on a lax peduncle. And another thing to note about it is that it has these beautiful purple basal sheaths. Do you see that there? That nice purple coloration that I'm touching? Yeah, there you go. So that's Carricks dabilis coming at you from the Hymenocalocloae. And then who we've got over here is the dancing ladies. This is Carricks granada. And it's called the dancing ladies because that gives, it might sound a little bit inappropriate perhaps, but it does give a good demonstration of the Carexes' reproductive morphology, them being monoecious plants. So this flower that I'm mousing over right now and just giving a good perusal to is, so Carexes are monoecious plants, right? Which means they have separate male and female flowering structures occurring on the same plant. So this right here, this is a female flower. All full of perigynia, which are full of achenes, getting ready to spill out and repopulate this wetland with some more Carricks granada. Absolutely lovely to see, but it's called the dancing ladies because these female fruits, they kind of dangle, and in the wind they'll sort of dance a little bit, like if I flick the culm. There you go. a nice little dance for you. So that's Carricks Granada, the dancing ladies. Gives a wonderful example of the monoecious nature of the Carexes, because you can see the male and female flowers going right next to each other. This one on the left, the skinnier one, is the male flower, the staminate flowers, and then this one on the right, which is more bulky, are the pistillate flowers, the female flowers. So there you go, some nice, ooh, wow. Yeah, that's ready to go, isn't it? Anyway, this guy's in section Phacoscistus, by the way, with Carricks aquatilus and stricta, which kind of surprised me a little bit, because I typically think of those as being more rhizomal and this guy being more of a clump former, but shows what I know about Carexes. What we've also got occurring in the same stretch is the lovely, this is a lovely plant you'll get in the wet woods a lot. This is Sororis cernuus, the lizard's tail. It gets that name from this the shape of its inflorescence, this nice white spike. And I'm kind of past prime. Oh, there's one that's kind of in bloom. Let's go over to it. This is a very strongly rhizomal plant. It colonizes wet areas quite well. It would do wonders in a ditch. I wish I saw more of this and less frag, but I always want to see less frag, because frag's just a devastating plant to the ecosystems that it gets found in. Unless we're talking about native frag, but that's a little bit more nuanced, and I don't really want to get into nuance right now. So there you go, lizard's tail, Sororis cernuus. This plant's got some ethnobotanical uses. I believe it was used by the Cherokee and the Choctaw tribe, I believe, for treatments of inflammation, and also by early settlers. It's got a wonderful pungent citrusy aroma that you get when the leaves are crushed, so walking through this is a real treat. Treat for the senses, I'd say. But anyway, so there's a couple Carexes and Sororis. So let's go see what else we can get into, huh? I think we're having a pretty good time in the wet woods. So I've found two tiny little treasures in a pretty narrow area, so we're going to go over them real quick. This first one is Bartonia virginica, the screw stem. This is coming at you from the gentian family, if you can believe it. It's such a tiny and diminutive plant being in the Gentianaceae, but it is. You're going to note the scale-like leaves on this guy, because that raises an interesting question. Look at those little leaves. And the question that raises, of course, is with such small leaves and such a small amount of photosynthetic area, how does this plant survive? And the answer to that is a very interesting answer, and that's because this plant is an example of a hemiparasite. This guy right here, the literature indicates that this tiny gentian is in fact partially mycoheterotrophic, which means that it steals nutrients from symbiotic fungi, which is pretty badass, a very smart way of getting some extra nourishment when your leaves can't hack the photosynthesis. So if I was these mushrooms, I'd be feeling a little bit worried right now. So there you go, Bartonia virginica, the screw stem. A very lovely little plant that you get in the wet woods. And the other tiny treasure was up on this hummock over here. Let's wander on over there. And what we've got right here is clearly another example of a monocot, given that parallel venation. We'll follow it up the stem to reveal a beautiful flower spike. What we're working with right here, folks, is an orchid. This is Platanthera clavellata, the small green wood orchid. Really living up to that name, given its diminutive stature, wouldn't you say? But anyway, some notable features about Platanthera clavellata. This is Indiana's smallest Platanthera species, by the way. Not sure how many species of Platanthera we get in Indiana, probably going to write that up, but this is the smallest one. So you can note that small stature as a diagnostic feature. You've also got this oblanceolate basal leaf here. And another thing that's really cool if you catch it in flower is the fact that these flowers actually rotate as you move up the spike. So you can see this one right here. Whoops, let me get the focus right. You can see that one right there, and then moving up, it rotates. So that's very neat. Platanthera clavellata, folks. Another tiny treasure coming at you from the Hydromesophytic forest system. And this place really is full of treasures, I would have to say. So who we're looking at right now is the lovely phagus grandifolia, the American beech tree. Now this is typically a species that you see in the climax community of the beech maple forest, but here it's acting as an indicator species for the mesic woodland segment of the Hydromesophytic forest. Like I said before, it's in the Phagaceae, the beech family, and it's got, what's notable about this tree is, of course, this beautiful elephant gray skin bark, this elephant skin bark. It's just this lovely shade of gray. And if you're ever in a public place and you see a beech tree, someone's gone and carved it all to hell, filled it up with initials and all kinds of garbage like that. So please, if you do ever encounter one of these trees in the wild and it's unblemished, make sure you leave it that way, because it's bad for the tree. And if I catch you doing it, it's going to be bad for your health. But here are the leaves on Phagus grandifolia, by the way. Lovely. Moving right along to another sedge, I think we're up for I think the sedge timer is reset and it's time to hit another one. And that's going to be this little cespitose guy. This is Carricks bromoides, and I can't show you the flowers on it, which is a bit unfortunate because, you know, when you're dealing with Carexes, looking at the flowers is typically your that's how you're going to get the ID made well. But again, this is Carricks bromoides, the brome-like sedge. And you might be asking how I can ID it when it doesn't have flowers, and that's because this is an indicator species for the wet woods, so you know you're going to run across it. But some other features of it, it's got this strongly cespitose nature. This is a very strongly, it forms little clumps. It looks like someone went out here and planted a bunch of Carricks bromoides, but that's just its growth habit. Very, very neat to see. And if I could show you Periginia, what we would note is that they're strongly lanceolate, and they've got a bunch of nerves on the inner face of the Periginia. But we can't note that right now. And again, the Periginia are also supposed to look like a brome, which is that's a genus of grasses. I don't really think it looks much like a brome, but that's my opinion, I guess. And this guy's coming at you from section Deweyiana. And now you might be asking yourself, hey, what's a section? Because Nate says sections a lot, but he usually only says it when he's slinging Carexes. And what a section is a taxonomic subdivision that's more specific than a genus while being less specific than a species. So it's a way of grouping related organisms from diverse genera into smaller groups with similar characteristics. And when you're working with a genus of plants like the Carexes, breaking it down into section is a really good idea, because how else are you going to find ways to identify the over 2,000 species that call the genus of Carexes home? You know, just a good organizational route. And I believe I see another sedge that I wanted to talk about. So let's wander on over and get a good look at this. What we've got right here is a Fraxinus, by the way, folks, in the Oleaceae, an ash tree. We'll talk about him real quick, because ash trees are really cool. If you'll remember, these got savaged by an invasive species, the emerald ash borer. But the literature on ash regeneration from the seed bank and from the smaller trees that were spared the initial invasion, because trees had to be a certain size for the ash borer to actually attack them. They couldn't attack the smaller juvenile trees. And so those survivors and the seed bank are making it, well, the ash borer basically burned itself out. It ate too much food. Unfortunately, it's popped up again in Oregon, which means it's probably going to spread throughout the West Coast, similar to the way it did in the Midwest. Not a really lovely thing to think about, but hopefully it'll burn itself out again and the ash forest will manage to make a regenerative effort. But anyway, let's talk about the sedge that I wanted to look at over here. Look at that spikelet. Looks like a damn mace. This is Carricks intumescens coming at you from the section Lupulinae. Now it's really easy to mix up Carricks intumescens, the shining burr sedge, with another sedge in the same section, Lupulinae, and that's Carricks grayi. However, the way you're going to distinguish them is by the number of Periginia per spikelet. Carricks grayi typically has like 8 to 35 Periginia per spikelet, whereas intumescens sits between 1 and 12. And additionally, Carricks grayi has wedge-shaped bases at the Periginia, whereas if we pop off this little Periginia of Carricks intumescens, you can see that the base is strongly rounded. Okay, so giving a dead giveaway that this is Carricks intumescens, a lovely species of sedge. And I think what I'm going to do right now is discuss a really cool phenomenon that occurs in these woodlands. It doesn't have a damn thing to do with plants. It's more focused on the topography. God, get a load of that Carricks intumescens. Isn't that lovely? Anyway, on the topography, you'll note in here that this habitat has got kind of a variable topography. You can see right there we've got some raised hummocks and some little depressions forming and stuff like that, and that gives rise to this really cool feature come springtime, and that's the formation of the ephemeral pools. And this occurs in I've broken it down into 5 steps. Step number 1, spring arrives. Step number 2, snow melt and spring precipitation fills the depressions and tree wells that you get in the hydromesophytic forest system with water. Step 3, this is where it gets real interesting, folks, is your various amphibian species, primarily frogs and salamanders. They breed in these pools and lay their eggs in them, making these pools invaluable for the continuation of generation for amphibian species. Step 4, the baby amphibians develop, grow, and exit the pools for wetter pastures. And step 5, the pools dry up over the summer, and the cycle recommences as the snows fall in the winter. Absolutely beautiful, and what we can see right here is a remnant of one of those ephemeral pools. Notice how much wetter the surrounding is than the surrounding area, and notice that it also sits at a lower elevation, so the water will just funnel in here. Absolutely awesome. A beautiful ecological phenomenon that you get occurring in the hydromesophytic forests. Oh yeah, pretty cool stuff, I think. And speaking of the ephemeral pools, this right here is one of the various species of amphibians that utilizes them. This is a wood frog, Lithobates sylvatica, I believe is the scientific name on that, though I'm no herpetologist. You can see what's identifiable about this is that dark brown stripes that they get by their eye. It's a diagnostic feature in this species. You can see it camouflages very, very well in the leaf litter here in the hydromesophytic forest. I wouldn't have noticed this thing if I hadn't spooked it into jumping. But what's really cool about the wood frogs is that they can, is their overwintering abilities, because these things, I didn't know I was going to see one, so I didn't read up on it, but I'll type it up in a sidebar here. But what's really neat about the wood frogs is that they can actually survive having the majority of their body frozen over the winter. They go into a state similar to like hibernation. I forget what it's called exactly. But yeah, so this is a very, very cool amphibian. Very, very happy to see it. But what I stopped to note is that you'll remember at the start of the video I mentioned that the vegetation in this area is comprised of the mesic woodland element and the forested wetland element, and that the ecotone between those two elements doesn't occur very, very neatly. And this area that I'm in right now gives a very good example of that, because what we've got is a lot of stuff that you would think of as occurring in the mesic woodlands occurring just right next to swamp vegetation. A very cool effect indeed. And we'll kick off that demo with this guy right here. This is the state tree of Indiana, by the way. This is Liriodendron tulipifera, the tulip poplar. Kind of a silly name, that, because this isn't a poplar at all. It's actually in the magnolia family, the Magnoliaceae. And you would note that if you've seen one of these things flower, because they have a beautiful flower about the size of your fist with spirally arranged tepals occurring at the terminal end of the branch, which is all of which are characteristics of the magnolia family. So we've got that guy, a character from the mesic woodlands. We've got this oak right here. This is Quercus alba. We've already talked about them, but this is a seedling of it. Note those nice lobes. And what we've also got occurring in this same stretch is a Carya, which is a hickory. Another tree that you would typically associate with the mesic woodlands. And again, we've got that phagus grandifolia letting us know some mesic woodland elements. But then, of course, like I've talked about, we've got Carricks bromoides, Carricks granada. We've got some, I saw a Carricks folliculata over there, all of which is vegetation that you get associated with the wet woods. So it's a little bit confusing, and it's a nice blend of vegetation that we're looking at here today, I think. And I think we've kind of demoed it pretty well. I'm getting bit up by mosquitoes, so I think I'm going to wrap this video to a close with that nice wood frog and that nice blending effect of the vegetation, because the ecotone isn't very clearly borne out in this system. So with that, I think I'm going to leave you guys. Hope you all had a nice time enjoying this video. Ask me some questions or something like that. That'd be fun.